Hi, my name is BarryMartin, and welcome to the Birthing the Luminous Self series on the God Center. If you haven't seen the first in this series, I would highly recommend you do so that you can get the most and greatest appreciation out of the second in the series, in which I'm going to really share a living experience of how I came into communion with the God Center, or the living place that God resides within my own being. One of the ways that many of us get in touch with the divine is through pain and suffering. And it's not necessary that it go that way, but it's common because it's what's often required to break down the control mechanisms of our ego, our separate self sense, enough that we can allow what's alive in the center of our soul to become present and aware to us. And that's certainly the case of what happened with me. Many years ago, when I was in my 20s, I was very much in the business world and thought life was all about money and career. I had been working for a large banking organization on the West Coast, and I decided to leave in hopes of becoming an entrepreneur with a small startup computer company in the Midwest. Large dollar signs were ringing in my head, and the possibility of becoming a millionaire was forefront of my mind. About this time, my marriage of 3 years was coming to an end. I had disregarded this marriage in my pursuit of career. I was pretty much lost in my ego. I was drinking excessively. I was smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day, living on caffeine, striving hard to be the idealized image of the successful business person I wanted to be. Things didn't work out with the computer company. It all fell apart quickly. And when this happened, my life continued to fall apart. Not only was I in the process of a divorce, but all of a sudden I had no income, and the debts that I had were now unmanageable. I began to sell my furniture and look for another job. Everything was cascading down into a really dark place. One afternoon, I found myself on the floor of my little condominium in Orange County, still in my suit, virtually no furniture, again sitting on the floor, drinking a can of beer, smoking a cigarette, in tremendous pain, wondering what was next. And in that moment, I looked out the window and saw a little orange tree that my wife and I had planted when we moved to California. And we planted it, we wondered what our life would be like when it finally produced its first blossoms. And lo and behold, there was the first blossom. And that was the moment the dam broke. And I just collapsed onto the floor. And I guess I hit that moment where I woke up and realized I was lost. I didn't have a clue how to live my life. I was deeply unhappy and suffering immensely. And I couldn't do this on my own. And I found myself praying to a God that I didn't even know existed at that point in time in my life. I was an agnostic. But everything in my being cried out for help. And it was open to the possibility that there might be help from beyond. And that was the turning point. That was the moment where I surrendered to something larger. I think that's really the key to getting in touch with what we really are. Because we literally are standing in our own way, our own self-contraction of ego personality, this false sense of self, thinking we're all that we're conditioned to believe we should be, that we're limited to what we see in the mirror. This little physical humanness. That has to have a crack in its armor so that something bigger can happen. My life didn't get any better for a while. What did happen was I began to feel a lot of energy and almost like a fluttering, and almost an anxiety and fluttering in the center of my chest, just above the heart. And at first I thought, oh my God, not only is everything else going bad, but maybe now I have a heart problem. And I was about to go to a cardiologist to find out if I was in imminent danger of a heart attack. And then I began to notice that this thing happened with some sort of periodicity. It wasn't there all the time. It would happen in a way that seemed to have some rhythm to it or some bigger purpose to it. I began to become aware and focus on it. What's going on here? I asked the question. I became aware that it would begin to move and vibrate and get energized at certain times, usually in relationship to something I was experiencing. One of those times was when I was talking to a dear friend who was talking about acupuncture, which to me seemed very strange and scary at the time. Nearly over 30 years, 40 years ago. But as she talked about it, I felt this energy in my chest, and it felt like, a rightness, a goodness about it. And I thought, God, maybe this is trying to get my attention. Maybe it's trying to guide me. And so I went and did acupuncture and found out it was an amazing thing. And so I woke up and realized that what this was inside of me was intelligent, and it was trying to guide me. And I began to follow its prompts. And as I did, I found that it would lead me to certain things and experiences that were perfect for me to have. Ones that began to answer this deeper question or questions of who am I really? Why am I here? What's this all about? Why am I suffering? How do I come to a sense of peace and happiness? And whatever I was led to based on its promptings moved me more and more in that direction. I began to experience a sense of peace for the first time in my life. I didn't know what it was. I was in constant stress and anxiety. with the acupuncture and then this settling into this place, I started to feel better. I began to go to a little bookstore in West LA called the Bodhi Tree, and I would walk through the bookstore, and this feeling would come, and I would see a book, and I would know it wanted me to read that book, and I would read that book, and it was exactly what I needed to read. There were things in there that would be stimulating, illuminating. So my practice became one of listening all the time. I became consciously aware and listening to this. And then I would spend time in the morning and the evening just closing my eyes and going in. Oftentimes I would put my hands right over this place, embracing it, holding it, and just bringing my awareness there. Just becoming aware of my breath, the feeling in this place. And it was a sort of devotion began to develop. I was in deep gratitude that I had found this and that it was leading me in the prayer that I made that day on the floor of my condominium was being answered. There was no doubt in my mind I was being led by something that was intelligent, wise, and loving. I knew exactly how to get me beyond my suffering to the joy and happiness and peace that I was seeking. As the years passed, I went deeper and deeper into this space above the heart. And as I did, more and more of what I thought I was would come to the surface to be surrendered into that space. Fears I had about life, doubts about myself, limiting ideas, all would surface. And I would simply let them go. I would surrender them into this space. And it became the nexus for this whole transformation. Because when I would simply be present with anything and hold it in this space, it would shift, it would change, it would transform. The fear, the knots of fear would dissolve, and what was left was peace and love. So I knew it was not only intelligent, I knew that it was completely capable of transforming anything and everything into what I really wanted. Those deeper divine qualities that I was seeking. As this space continued to open up in meditation, it expanded and expanded, and I could feel more clearly that it was connected vertically right up into the light of God. And that the light of all that is, or God, descended into and through this space, out into everything. Eventually, it took me to a place where I was living on the island of Kauai. And I began to completely dissolve all sense of body and self into this space. And as that happened, a very great excitation began at the base of my spine. A lot of energy. And as I surrendered into that energy and let it move up through me, each chakra would open. And as they did, this center opened up more and more. And over a period of a few weeks, this Kundalini energy rose the whole way up, opened up every chakra, went out the top of my head. And when it did, this center completely opened. The inner experience was one of having the goddess Shakti come to me in divine tantric union, where I was drawn into her. And at the moment this center opened completely, and I expanded into everything. My being encompassed the universe. Star fields of galaxies were held within me. And the reality that my being was one with God, all it is, it was readily apparent. And the journey did not end at this point. It continues to this day, more than 30 years later. But it's the same process. That living presence of God that is my true nature continues to unfold and embody itself and be increasingly expressed, realized, actualized in my human experience. And this process goes on and on. And all the sense of human self and limitation dissolves and dissolves. The wheel of karma and samsara slows. Until all these bodies, all these chakras are nothing but the light and living presence of God. And that's when we step off the wheel finally. Moksha, liberation, ascension, the end of the human experience. The goal, the fruit of the soul's journey in human embodiment. And it all starts with conscious communion with that living presence of God in us, the divine flame. That is the first goal of the journey. The one that all paths and practices lead to. And blessings on your journey to having your own direct conscious experience and communion with your true self, the living presence of God being that you are.